Lake Peigneur used to be a regular lake. It was a pretty typical lake in Louisiana. People fished there, they boat rode there. It was just a normal part of life for the folks living nearby. This lake was not very deep. It was fresh water. You could find all sorts of local fish in its waters. It sat over a big salt dome, which is a common thing in that part of the world. Underneath the lake, inside this salt dome, there was a working salt mine. This mine was run by Diamond Crystal Salt Company. It had been there for a long time. People worked hard in that mine. They dug out salt, which is used for all sorts of things. The mine had many levels. It went down deep into the earth. The lake and the mine lived side by side, in a way. One on top, one underneath. Most people probably didn't think much about the connection. They just knew the lake was there. And they knew the salt mine was there. The lake had some little islands on it. And it had a canal, the Delcombra Canal, that flowed into it. It was a peaceful place. It was a productive place. Life went on. But then things changed. On November 20th, 1980, something very unusual happened. Texaco, an oil company, had an oil rig set up on the lake. They were drilling. They were looking for oil. This was also a common thing in Louisiana. Oil drilling happens a lot there. The rig was a big structure. It had a long drill bit. This bit was supposed to go down into the earth. It was supposed to find oil deposits. No one expected what was about to happen. No one could have imagined it. The lake was just going about its business. The mine was going about its business. The oil rig was going about its business. It was just another day, but it would turn out to be a day no one would forget. It would be a day that changed the lake forever. It would be a day that showed how powerful nature can be, and how a simple mistake can lead to something unbelievable. The lake, before this day, was known for its quiet beauty. It was a place for families to spend time. Fishermen would wake up early. They would go out on their boats. They would cast their lines. They would try to catch some bass or catfish. The water was calm most of the time. The shores were green. Trees grew around the edges. It felt like a solid, unchanging part of the landscape. It felt like it would always be there. The salt mine was just as much a part of the area. It provided jobs. It was a major employer. The miners went deep underground every day. They worked in the dark, carving out huge rooms of salt. The salt dome itself was a massive structure. It was like a big underground mountain of salt. Over millions of years, salt layers push up through softer rock. They form these big domes. Lake Peigneur sat right on top of one. This dome was miles across. It went down miles deep, so you had a natural lake, a natural salt dome. You had a human-made mine. And you had a human-made oil rig. All these things were in their places. They were operating. There was nothing to suggest any problem. No one knew what was coming. No one had any warning. They just lived their lives. They worked their jobs. And the lake just held its fresh water like it always had. That was the picture of Lake Peigneur before everything went wrong. A picture of normal life in Louisiana. On November 20th, 1980, the Texaco oil rig was busy drilling. It was a normal Thursday. The rig was near the center of Lake Peigneur. Its job was to drill for oil. That's what oil rigs do. The drill bit was far down. It was making its way through the earth. Suddenly, the drill bit got stuck. This happens sometimes. It's not totally unheard of. The crew tried to free it. They tried to pull it up, but it wouldn't budge. Then, things got weird. The drilling rig started to tilt. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. The crew looked around. They saw something strange happening in the lake. The water was moving. It was swirling. A big whirlpool was forming around the rig. It got bigger. It got faster. It was like the lake was draining, right under their feet. Panic set in. The rig crew knew they were in trouble. This was not normal. The rig was sinking. It was being pulled down. They scrambled to get off. They jumped onto barges nearby. They got into boats. They got away from the rig as fast as they could. As they watched the rig, a massive piece of equipment went down into the swirling water. It was swallowed by the lake. But it wasn't just the rig. The whirlpool kept growing. It started pulling in other things. Barges that were tied up on the lake, trees from the shore. Whole sections of land started to collapse. They slid into the swirling vortex. The water was rushing down. Where was it going? No one knew for sure at that moment, but it was clear. The lake was disappearing. Meanwhile, a mile underground, the salt miners were working. It was dark down there. They heard a strange rumbling sound. Then a roar. A loud, terrible noise. Water started coming in. Not a drip, not a leak. A flood. A gushing torrent of water. It was coming from above. It was coming from the ceiling. The miners knew immediately this was bad. This was very bad. They had to get out. There were 50 miners down there. They rushed to the escape shafts. They climbed up fast as they could. Water was rising quickly. It was filling the mine. They barely made it out. They got to the surface. They saw the lake, or what was left of it. It was a huge gaping hole. The water was still pouring down. The Lake Peigneur, was emptying itself into the mine below. The Texaco drill bit had punctured the mine. It had drilled right into one of the salt caverns. Once that hole was made, it was like pulling the plug on a bathtub, but a bathtub the size of a lake. The billions of gallons of fresh water rushed down. It created a massive waterfall underground. It filled the mine tunnels. It dissolved the salt. It collapsed the mine structure. The ground above gave way. That's what created the giant whirlpool. That's what pulled in the rig, the barges, the land. It all happened so fast. Within a few hours, Lake Peigneur was gone. It was replaced by a massive crater. It was like the earth had opened up, the water just kept pouring in. Even the Delcombre Canal, which fed the lake, reversed its flow. Its water rushed into the crater, too. It was a spectacle of destruction. No one had ever seen anything like it. It was a day of terror, it was a day of disbelief, but miraculously no one died. Everyone, from the rig and the mine, got out in time. It was a true escape from a natural disaster made worse by human error. The immediate aftermath was shocking. Where Lake Peigneur used to be, there was now a giant, deep crater. It was just a big hole in the ground. The land around it was scarred. Trees that once stood on the shore were gone. They had been dragged down into the abyss. Barges, fishing boats, and even the Texaco oil rig itself had vanished. They were all at the bottom of what was once a mine, now a massive sinkhole. The landscape had completely changed. It was unrecognizable. People came from all over to see it. They stood at the edge of the crater. They looked down into the swirling water. They couldn't believe their eyes. A lake, just gone. It was like something out of a science fiction movie, but it was real. It was happening right there in Louisiana. The investigation started right away. Everyone wanted to know what happened. How could a lake just disappear? Texaco, Diamond Crystal Salt Company, and government agencies all got involved. It didn't take long to figure out the main cause. The Texaco drill bit had made a mistake. It had drilled in the wrong place. Instead of hitting oil, it hit the Diamond Crystal Salt mine. Specifically, it hit one of the mine's deepest caverns. Here's how it worked. The lake had fresh water. The mine was full of air. When the drill bit punctured the mine, it created a direct opening. There was a huge pressure difference. The water from the lake, under its own weight, rushed down into the empty mine. It was like uncorking a bottle, but on a massive scale. The water poured in with incredible force. As the lake water flowed into the mine, it started to dissolve the salt. Salt is very soluble in water. The mine tunnels were made of salt. The pillars supporting the mine were salt. As the water rushed in and dissolved the salt, the mine structure became weak. It started to collapse. The roof of the mine gave way. This collapse moved upwards through the rock and earth above. It reached the bottom of the lake. When the lake bed collapsed, the water had a direct path into the enlarging cavity. This is what created the giant whirlpool. It pulled everything down. Billions of gallons of water went down into that mine. It filled up all the tunnels. It dissolved everything in its path. The mine was no longer a mine. It was a vast underground lake, and the surface lake was now a massive, deep hole. The destruction was complete. The miracle was that no one died. The Texaco crew got off the rig just in time. The Diamond Crystal miners, all 50 of them, escaped the mine before it flooded completely. They climbed up through emergency exits. They made it to the surface, hearing the water roar behind them. It was a near-perfect evacuation. Pure luck, some might say. Quick thinking and good safety procedures, others might argue. Either way, it was an incredible escape. But there were other losses. The salt mine was ruined. It closed down for good. Hundreds of people lost their jobs. It was a huge economic blow to the community. Texaco faced massive lawsuits. Diamond Crystal lost its mine. Nearby plant nurseries with millions of dollars in plants were destroyed as their irrigation systems were affected, or their land collapsed. The land itself, worth millions, was gone. The damage was immense. The investigation pinpointed the error. Texaco was deemed responsible. The company had used maps that were not up to date. They drilled where they thought it was safe, but it wasn't. It was a costly mistake. A devastating mistake. The immediate shock faded a bit, but the crater was still there. And people wondered, what now? Would the lake ever come back? What would it be like? The land had been torn open, the earth had been swallowed, and everyone learned a hard lesson about drilling and the dangers of underground mining. After the dramatic disappearance, people wondered if Lake Peigneur would ever be a lake again. It was a big question. For a while, it was just a giant, deep hole. But slowly, water started to flow back in. Not from the original sources. The Del Cambre Canal had actually reversed its flow during the incident. It drained into the crater, but over time, the canal resumed its normal flow. It started to feed water back into the new basin. Then something else happened. The Mississippi River. Yes, that massive river. Its waters, through a series of bayous and canals, found a way to the new Lake Peigneur. This was a big change. The old Lake Peigneur was a freshwater lake. It was fed by local runoff and some smaller streams. But now, it was connected to the Gulf of Mexico through the Del Cambre Canal, which now also had a direct route to the sea. The water coming in was no longer purely fresh. It was brackish, it was saltwater. So the lake refilled, but it was a completely different lake. The original depth of Lake Peigneur was only about 10 feet. It was shallow. You could see the bottom in many places. The new Lake Peigneur was much, much deeper. In some spots, it was over 200 feet deep. This was because the entire mine structure underneath had collapsed. It created a massive deep basin. The water had filled this giant cavity. The change in water type meant a change in everything else. Our freshwater fish could no longer survive there. So the old fish populations died out. New fish, saltwater fish, started to move in. Redfish, speckled trout, and other species that thrive in brackish or saltwater became common. The ecosystem shifted entirely. The plants along the shore that needed fresh water also struggled. New, salt-tolerant plants began to grow. The entire biological makeup of the lake changed. For the local community, this was a big deal. Fishermen who used to target bass now had to learn how to fish for redfish. The nature of their sport changed. The types of boats they used might change. The whole feeling of the lake was different. It wasn't the same place they remembered. It still had the name Lake Peigneur, but it was a new body of water, a new experience. Visually, the lake was still beautiful, but it carried the scars of what happened. The shoreline was different. Some of the small islands that were once there were gone, swallowed up by the collapse. The land around it still showed signs of the trauma. It was a constant reminder of that unbelievable day. The psychological impact on the people living nearby was real. They had seen their lake disappear. They had seen their landscape change drastically. It was a powerful reminder of how fragile things can be, how quickly everything can be turned upside down. The story of Lake Peigneur became a local legend. Everyone knew about it. Everyone talked about it. It was a part of their history now. Environmentally, the changes were long-lasting. The deep saltwater lake created a new habitat. It was a robust ecosystem, but it was not the original one. It showed how human actions, even accidental ones, can permanently alter natural environments. The lake had been transformed from a peaceful freshwater pond into a deep, brackish Gulf arm. It was a different world under the surface, and on the surface, it was a different view. The lake had returned, yes, but it was a return in a completely new form. A form shaped by a very unusual, very dramatic event. The event at Lake Peigneur led to a lot of legal action. Texaco, the oil company, was sued by Diamond Crystal Salt Company. Texaco was also sued by the owners of the plant nurseries that were destroyed, and they were sued by other affected businesses and landowners. It was a complicated and expensive legal battle. In the end, Texaco paid out a lot of money. They settled with Diamond Crystal for a large sum, reportedly over $32 million. They settled with the plant nurseries for over $12 million. The total cost for Texaco was huge. It showed the financial consequences of such a large-scale mistake. This incident also brought about changes in how things were done. Specifically, it changed drilling practices. Before Lake Peigneur, there might have been less strict rules about drilling near mines. There might have been less emphasis on sharing detailed, up-to-date maps between different companies. After Lake Peigneur, that changed. Companies became much more careful. They shared more information. They updated their maps more often. They put in place better safety protocols. It was a wake-up call for the entire industry. It showed the importance of knowing exactly what's below you when you drill. Lake Peigneur became a famous case study. Geologists and engineers studied it. They looked at how salt domes behave. They looked at how water pressure works. They looked at how a large-scale collapse can happen. It taught them a lot about the dynamics of the Earth and the risks involved in resource extraction. It's still talked about in engineering schools today. It's an example of an improbable event that actually happened. The story of Lake Peigneur has truly become a part of Louisiana's folklore. It's a tale that's told and retold. It highlights the power of nature. It also highlights the potential for human error to have massive unforeseen consequences. It's a unique story because of its scale. It's not every day a whole lake disappears. And it's even rarer for that lake to come back as a completely different type of lake. The transformation from freshwater to saltwater is a striking detail. The community around the lake, the people of Jefferson Island and New Iberia, showed resilience. They picked up the pieces. They adapted to the new lake. They found new ways to fish. They found new ways to enjoy their surroundings. They kept going. The memory of what happened is still there, of course. It's a powerful part of their local history. The Lake Peigneur incident serves as a lasting reminder. It reminds us that our actions, even small ones, can have huge impacts on the environment. It reminds us to be careful, to be thorough, and to always respect the natural world around us. It's a story that tells us that sometimes the most unbelievable things can happen. And when they do, they leave a mark that lasts for a very long time. The lake is still there today. It's still called Lake Peigneur. But it's a different lake, a lake with an incredible story. A lake that disappeared down a salt mine and then came back, changed forever. It's a testament to how complex our world is, and how sometimes everything changes in an instant.